Well, hello everyone, and welcome or welcome back if you have been with us before. My name is Tommy Hensel, and I am the director of the Fine and Performing Arts Center at Moraine Valley Community College. Moraine Valley is located in Palos Hills, Illinois, which is a southwest suburb of Chicago. Back in March of last year, like everybody, when we realized that there was something strange going on in the world, we were asked to close down and reschedule all of our programming for just that spring. But as we moved forward, it became keep pushing it forward, keep pushing it forward. And now it's been over a year, and we have been dark that entire time in our theaters. So about a month or so after we had to close down the theater, we were talking about how can we stay engaged with our audiences. And so one of the things that occurred to me is that over the years, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, we've had some astonishing artists on our stages, people who are just phenomenal performers, but also many of them have become personal friends of mine. And I realize that all of them have fascinating stories about who they are, how they got to do what they do, and just how they became part of this massive infrastructure of the performing arts world. So I decided I would reach out to some of those people and ask them if they would sit in their rooms, wherever they happen to be beaming in from, and do an interview show with me. So we've now been doing this since early May of last year. And this, I think, is our 32nd interview tonight. So I'm very excited to welcome to the broadcast studio a great friend of mine and somebody who I have the great privilege to work with in a number of projects over the last several years. So please join me in welcoming to our broadcast studio tonight the amazing, talented Mr. Ronnie Malley. Hey, Ronnie.
Hey, Tommy. How are you?
I am well, thank you. So I'm calling from Berwyn, which is outside of Chicago. I'm a suburb of Chicago. And you're actually in the city, correct?
I am. I'm in Bucktown, neighborhood of Chicago.
Awesome. So we're not too far apart.
No, not at all. Actually, my mom lives very close to Berwyn. She's out
okay.
there.
Well, yeah. You know, it's actually, I think when I do a map quest for Google Maps or something for downtown, it's about 9 miles. So it's a pretty zippy commute. Yeah. So I'm excited to have you here tonight because one of the things that I learned very early on when we first met each other is that every time somebody would talk about you, they would talk about you doing something, and then it would be something completely different, and then something completely different. And I'm like, how can one person be so good at so many things? So I'm throwing that out there because I think you're just an astonishing person and performer and artist. So I'm excited to have you here.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Tommy. And likewise, I mean, I could say the same about you. I would talk to folks that I was interacting with and like, you should talk to Tommy Hensel. You should talk to Tommy Hensel. And then all of a sudden I see your name everywhere. I think when you came to Chicago, you pretty much put your hands in so many different pots. It's amazing.
Well, you know what I did is when I moved here from the East Coast for this job 13 years ago, it was 2008. And I did not know anyone in Chicago. I moved completely like, hey, sounds like a great job. Never been there. So when I got here, I realized that I didn't know anything at all about the artistic community in Chicago, particularly the people who do what I do, which is presenting, hiring artists to come in and do shows. So the first thing I did is I sat down and I found a list of all these different presenters and funding organizations and leaders in the arts. And I just started calling everybody saying, hey, you don't know who I am, but I'm here now and I'd like to meet you. so I spent a lot of time in my car the first 3 or 4 months that I was here.
Right.
But you know what? It pays off because most of those people are still my friends. Many of them have moved on to different jobs, but they've stayed in the industry. So it's a way to become connected,
Absolutely. I was very fortunate to even see you at Arts Midwest as well. And you were chairing programs there as a presenter and heading a few of the different presenting organizations there as well. Oh, that's there's a saying in Arabic that says "Sudfun khayrun min alf ma'ad," which means coincidence is better than 1,000 appointments.
Yes, yes, it is. And at some point, if I ever learn to speak Arabic, I'm going to have to learn how to say that.
Definitely.
I'm a linguist in many ways. I speak a number of languages, but they're all the languages that we were sort of taught when we were growing up. So, I'm pretty good at Spanish and French and Italian and German, but that's kind of it.
It's good though. It keeps us sharp.
I think it does too. So, Arabic, I'm going to have to look into Arabic a little bit. I subscribe to that like app called
Duolingo or
Duolingo. So I think they must have Arabic on Duolingo.
Yes. Well. Yeah.
Oh, well, my friend Tamima is here tonight. She just put a little post up. So you met Tamima when you were working at with us at Moraine Valley.
Yes.
So hello, Tamima. Thanks for being in tonight. So Ronnie, one of the things that I always tell people when I'm interviewing is that I have absolutely no agenda of what we're going to talk about. It kind of just happens organically, with one exception. I always have one question that I feel it has kind of always opens the conversation in a way that makes me interested and makes the person I'm interviewing sort of think a little bit. And it's the question about going back in time in your mind to your childhood and sort of figuring out, where was it that music suddenly, when was it that you became enamored of the concept of music? And then at what point in your evolution growing up did you say, I want to do this? This is what I want to do.
That's a great question. I was very fortunate to actually have grown up in a very musical family. My father was a musician. My younger brother is a musician. And I even had cousins who played, instruments, guitar, and a variety of different things. And so it's always been in the ethos, and as you know, I grew up in Oak Lawn, which is right next to Palos Hills, right next to Moraine Valley. And not many people realize that actually Oak Lawn and that entire area was very popular for a lot of music. A lot of great bands actually came out from those regions. There's the hard rock band that many people are familiar with called Disturbed, which came out of Oak Lawn. And in fact, the bass player was my first guitar teacher over at Rossi Music over on 95th Street. And there were a lot of other groups. You would hear like Cheap Trick, Styx, and Jimmy Pedrick didn't live very far. And so it just it was in the ethos, and everybody had a garage band. So I could say that when I was younger, my dad had a club on the north side of Chicago.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was aptly named Cleopatra. And it was with him and his bandmates. And he would take us there on weekends. And obviously there were instruments strewn about the house everywhere. So we would go and just gravitate towards one thing or the other. And my initial instrument was percussion, because he's a percussionist and so is my brother. And so I would pick up the different percussion instruments and really fell in love with rhythm. And so he said, my dad, saw that, and he said, all right, I'll get you want to join band in school. So I joined band in grade school, and he got me a snare drum. And so I was in the percussion section, the orchestral percussion section, up until junior high school, I would say, or high school. And, but up until then, I was just kind of picking up guitar. And I just looked at my dad and I said, look, I love percussion, but if we're going to be like a family band, one of us needs to play melody. So I'll split the difference and pick up guitar. And I was probably about 11, maybe, because I had seen the guitarist playing on stage with him. And I sat down and talked to him a couple of times. And the guitarist says, if you make your commitment to be a musician, though, you need to like practice. And, a small anecdote, I guess this was a time when smoking was allowed in the clubs and everything. And I just remember him taking his cigarette butt. I'm sitting at the bar, this 12-year-old kid at this restaurant bar. He takes his cigarette and puts it out on his fingertip. He says, if you can do that, then you're practicing enough. I said, well, I'm not going to put out any cigarettes on my fingertips, but I get it. And so I went home and I committed to, practicing 6-8 hours a day. But I was learning a lot of rock and roll. That was what was in the ethos. That was what was in my environment. And so my dad said, look, if you save up to buy a guitar, I'll pay for the lessons. And so he employed me at my uncle's bakery at the age of 12, and I got a paper route. I even lied on the application to say I was 13 when I was really 12, but it was close enough, right? And so I saved up for a guitar eventually, and he did pay for the lessons. And then I started to perform with him on stage. But my brother and I always kept a rock band in the garage, and we would play and we would go out and put that together. So it was an interesting dichotomy that here I was playing, American music, which was rock and roll, which I loved. But my dad was, I don't want to say secretly doing it, but he's kind of subconsciously giving us all that he could about our own culture. And my background is Palestinian American, but a lot of the music that's popular throughout the Middle East and North Africa is from Egypt. So we had a very healthy dose of Egyptian music, Levantine music, Jordanian, Iraqi music. And at the same time, my brother and I had a healthy dose of hard rock and heavy metal. But so the ethos was always saturated with music. But it was a very interesting thing because at the age of 12, we were already playing on stage. I didn't think of it as like, this is my career. I just thought of it, this is what I do, what I love to do. And we would just sit at home and play and learn songs all day. So a variety of the gigs, if you will, that we were getting as a family band were weddings, clubs, restaurants, festivals. So it was a commercial kind of thing. But in the back of my mind, and what everybody would always say, I'm sure you've probably heard yourself, is when are you going to get a real job, kid?
Yeah, I heard that a lot.
and I've always had a sense of tenacity in me that I'd listen to folks, I'd listen to advice, but in the end, I go with my heart and my gut. But I did get a quote unquote real job. I started working a lot of different things, and when I was actually at college at Moraine, I was working and managing a lot of my uncle's service stations, which also offered a great opportunity to study. And so I kind of got into retail in that sense as well. And then I thought, retail hours are just too long. What can I do that's shorter? And my grandmother suggested, get a job at a bank. You'll be done by 5 p.m. And so I got a job at a bank. And then my cousin saw me doing that. And he said, hey, I got something similar to that. I'll pay for your license if you go get your appraiser's license, your real estate appraising. And he had a company. So I did that for a few years. And eventually I had to stop. I think I saw a documentary about the making of Dark Side of the Moon for Pink Floyd.
Nice.
And the documentary in it, Roger Waters kind of just says, we didn't know where we were going to be. And one day I just woke up and said, if you're going to do it, now is the time. Do it now, right now. And so I made a conscious decision to kind of whittle down my corporate world, if you will, that business aspect, and really come back to commit and focus into doing music. So I would say I was in my mid-20s when that happened. And then I started to create a lot of different bands and explore different things. But I would say that one pivotal moment was, and this is when I really decided to become kind of an educator as well, is I had a friend who invited me to come and lecture in one of their ethnomusicology courses about Egyptian music, something I had grown up learning about and playing all my life. And I just had a weird thought for a second. I said, wait, somebody's interested in learning about this? All right, I'll come and talk about it. And I was, it was an epiphany at that moment that I realized this isn't just me playing on stage, getting a gig and getting paid. I'm actually inheriting something that I consider to be a responsibility to my culture, to my heritage. And as an Arab American or Palestinian American, this is something that I can also take back to my community, to people who were my peers or also born here, and share what I was learning. So it became a portal of culture to learn about themselves and their own identities.
Awesome. Yeah, because I was going to wonder from how did get from rock and roll to all of the many different variations of bands that you have put together now, of music from the Levant region and from that part of the world. I just think it's extraordinary. And you sent me some really fascinating videos. What do you think would be a good one? Is the Apollo's Fire a good one to start with, or
any of them, if you'd like? I can speak to it, either one of them. I can set this particular one up. This is more of a recent video. And in it, I found myself, again, another one of those divergent paths where you start playing Middle Eastern music, but then you start to learn about the history of music in general, because it does play an integral role into the formation of even Western music and the overlap that occurs. And one of those particular fulcrum points, if you will, is Baroque music from the Renaissance period, particularly 15th century and on. And I learned that there are a lot of what they call early music ensembles. And a couple of times, one of them asked me to play here, which was called the Newbury Consort in Chicago.
Yeah.
And through them, I was connected to a Grammy Award-winning Baroque ensemble in Ohio called Apollo's Fire. And so they invited me on their program called O Jerusalem. And it was celebrating the quarters of Jerusalem. And this was not, she didn't even know I was Palestinian at the time, or that my mother is from Jerusalem. So it just kind of all serendipitously worked out. And so I presented a talk and some pieces of music to this ensemble. And the piece that you're going to actually see is by the Egyptian composer Riyad al-Simbati. He's an actually early 20th century composer. So it veers a little outside of the early music genre, but it's still early in many senses. And so this is myself playing with Apollo's Fire in the Apollo's Fire Orchestra.
Great. So I'm going to pull this one up. I'm my own technician, so I have to.
I know the feeling. I know the feeling.
Here we go. So there we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Awesome.
Thank you, thank you. I've
So
done,
for people who don't know, what was the instrument that you were playing there?
so the instrument I'm playing is called al-oud, and it's a Middle Eastern instrument that originated in Mesopotamia, and in around the mid 9th century, it was taken all the way to Cordoba, Spain,
Mhm.
by a figure named Ziryeb, uh, who I actually wrote an entire play about.
Yeah, I
And
was going to ask you about it. So there you
and he took this instrument to Cordoba, Spain, which at the time was becoming it was under Islamic rule, but it still encompassed all of the diversity that the Iberian Peninsula had. And so eventually this instrument, al-oud, becomes a lute, the European lute, from which actually it derives its name from al-oud, a lute. And eventually that became the classical guitar. So the instrument is really the great-great-grandfather of the guitar.
I know, which I love that story. And it's interesting when you listen to the piece that you just played, you hear that same sort of style and tonality that we now associate with the music of Cordoba and that part of Spain. When we get into flamenco music, even you hear all of those roots that are coming from Arab music into Spain, which I think is astonishing.
Absolutely. Music is such a cumulative thing. That's why I think I drifted so much into the direction of music, because through it I found that I wasn't only making music, but I was also learning history. And I got deep into ethnomusicology and even started to teach a course on world music at the Chicago Academy for the Arts.
Yep. It's funny. I have a degree in music, and the ethnomusicology was a big part of the degree program because they wanted to make sure that we, no matter what our instruments were, that we had a grounding and understanding that just where so much of what we today think of as just an instrument that, like a guitar, that we just think somebody invented the guitar and poof, there it was. And we know that's not how it works.
Totally. Nothing works in a vacuum. It took a global village to make everything that we have today in this world.
So we're going to skip around a little bit because that actually leads me into the conversation about the project where you and I first really worked together closely was called American Griot. And for those of you who are watching who aren't aware of the program, and it was 2016 actually. Wow. In the early part of the year, a grant program came available for people to apply for, and it was through the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, and they were giving money to colleges who could put together a compelling narrative about how they could use the funds to promote understanding of Muslim culture through interaction with artists. And so I wrote this grant not thinking that, Moraine Valley, that we had a prayer of getting it, because we were up against, Harvard and Yale and UCLA and all of these big colleges. And darned if we didn't get the grant. So part of the funding and part of my proposal was to work with our theater department to develop an original play. And so we collaborated with our friends at Silk Road Rising Theater, who you had worked with them for Ziryab, right?
Correct.
And I remember our first meeting with Craig Rosen, who was the director, and I, and the team from Silk Road, the theme that, interestingly enough, both they and us had come up with the same theme independently. And we wanted to explore the Muslim roots of the blues. And poof, this project was born. So I'd love to know a little bit about, with that background, so how, when it was pitched to you, what was your thought about the project, and then sort of how did it evolve?
Well, initially, actually, you had mentioned Ziryab, and it started from that point, actually. Jamil Khouri had asked me about, what are you working on? We're doing these solo plays, and we'd love to have more musicians involved into putting together the solo piece. And so I kind of threw everything at them that stuck, and I was doing a stint at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival for a little while. And while I was there, they had asked me if I'd like to do a green show, which is these shows that they put on before the play actually begins. Yeah. And I said, I've always wanted to write a quick storytelling kind of show about this figure named Ziryab. who was purported to have been of African ancestry in Iraq, in Baghdad, which a lot of Africans were there too. He happened to be what they say in his story, a freed slave. And he found himself in the court of the caliphate at the time, which was Harun al-Rashid, the famed figure in the Arabian Nights. And I just kind of put that story together. And when Silk Road asked me about it, I said, well, this is something I have that's kind of put together. And they said, well, this is wonderful. Do you think you can add more to it? So I started to add more to it, and they wanted it to become a little bit more autobiographical. So I started adding myself to it and doing a lot more really diligent research. Well, upon doing a lot of this research, I stumbled upon a wonderful article in the journal called Saudi Aramco. And the article, the title right on the front page was Muslim Roots in U.S. Blues. And I used some of that article to inform, like, well, what was the presence of Islam on the Iberian Peninsula for Ziryeb, etc. But I shared that article with the folks at Silk Road, and I said, you know, this is something really good, and perhaps even a whole other avenue to pursue later on. But let's, we'll bench it for now. Well, that avenue, it stuck in their heads, because when you went and asked them, they said, I think we got the right thing that we want to propose to you right now. And to my surprise, I was like, okay, you want to commission me to write this? It's my second play I'm being commissioned to write in my life. And, though I'd done a lot of theater, anything from acting, sound design, performing in the pit, etc., I hadn't really written a play, until Ziryeb and then American Griot. And they paired me with a wonderful award-winning author, Reginald Edmund, who is a brilliant storyteller and a writer. He heads a wonderful organization called Black Lives, Black Words. And when we got together, we just co-wrote it. We co-wrote I brought a lot of the musical research to it. I had played with a lot of griots, people who were traditional griots, particularly from Senegal and Mali. And as I delved even deeper into it, it took me in even more. Because I felt the story was so relevant. There was, how I said earlier that a coincidence is better than 1,000 appointments. This was a total coincidence, because at that time I was also working with a school in Inglewood, Lindblom Math and Science Academy, which is predominantly African-American school. And we were doing research through choir, through music. And we were doing a unit on minstrelsy at the time. And I was extremely surprised. And for those who don't know what minstrelsy was, it was really the birth of the derogatory art form of blackface. And they didn't know anything about it. I thought, this only happened 100 years ago. Imagine other elements. So I felt even more vested in wanting to tell a story like that. And so I stumbled upon a really wonderful scholar of the African diaspora, particularly Muslim African diaspora. Her name is Sylviane Diouf. And she had written several books, one of which was called Servants of Allah. And then there were other books that, my first inkling always is to go to the bibliography and see, well, where did all these guys get their resources?
Me too. I'm a researcher.
I love it. I've been doing that since I was a kid. And it just gives you more options to find stuff too. Mm-hmm. And also an adventure to go out and see where you can seek these resources. And so I found so much about, African Muslims in antebellum America. I found books and articles written about the presence of Muslims in African Muslims in America during the transatlantic slave trade. And I thought, why don't we know about this? Why isn't anybody talking about this? So when you guys partnered up and asked me to put this together with Reginald, I thought, this is a great opportunity for us to try to dispel these notions, these misconceived notions that Americans have had on the legacy of slavery in America, but also to provide information to many communities, the African-American community involved, the Muslim community as well, to realize that, Muslims have been a part of this country since its inception. Mm-hmm. Thomas Jefferson himself owned a Quran, and in some ways, some of the things written in the Quran informed his writing of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So, but the most profound notion I think that really struck me was the musical instruments that were not only brought over with the enslaved people, but also recreated here based on the prototypes that were in Africa, like the banjo, like different bowed type of instruments, different mouthing instruments, and percussion instruments as well. But also that up to 30 to 35% of the enslaved people were Muslim. In essence, they also read and wrote Arabic,
Mm-hmm.
which immediately dispels this notion that, you know, these were illiterate savages, as they tried to proclaim about the natives here as well. And this was proof positive, like, no, they read and wrote. These were sophisticated people that came from sophisticated cultures. So that was what really excited me. And I realized that in telling the story of American Griot and also telling the story of Zidiab, it was kind of my way of, you know, telling these omitted histories, these things that I didn't learn about going to public school here.
Yep. So before I show this clip, that's a little bit of information about the play. For people who don't know, what is a griot?
So a griot, and the word griot really is the French word. If we're going to look at different regions, they call it different things. Basically, it's a musician, storyteller, but it's not just a storyteller. It's somebody who delivers the news in many ways. So if you're in some parts of West Africa, you're either called a Jali, Gewel, or Gaulo, or griot. But even in Middle Eastern tradition, we have Hakawati, which is a very similar kind of somebody who is a conduit to express the social expression of what's happening around them. So the Shanachis, for example, in Ireland are very similar. That's a similar type of tradition as well.
Okay, so I'm going to show this sort of video that we put together about American Griot, and then we can talk a little bit more about it. Let me cue this up. Let's see.
The title American Griot came about one day where we were just brainstorming. It just kind of came out, as many titles do sometimes. But the story is of a griot and the griot tradition where they are storytellers and keepers of history. And so the play was loosely based on some real life characters who were brought over to the States, enslaved, but they happened to be Muslim. And we thought, well, let's talk about what the griot tradition has had on America itself. And we started off the play with a figure that's kind of like another icon of American music, Robert Johnson, who's a blues guitarist. And we thought, wow, you know, here's this American, here's this griot. It just came out, American Griot. It's really about how this history has influenced what America is as well, and what American music really is. Not to mention the instruments, predecessors to the banjo, predecessors to other instruments and sounds and styles. So it's definitely going to be a wonderful journey. He's so glad when the sun goes down. He's so glad when the sun goes down. He's so glad when the sun goes down. I get to work with my co-writer on the play and co-creator of the play, Reginald Edmond. And we're working with Dr. Craig Rosen, who's here at the theater department. And it's a really wonderful thing that was facilitated not only by the Mosaics series at Moraine Valley, but also another wonderful theater company in Chicago called Silk Road Rising. So I was very fortunate and honored to have been asked to help co-create this wonderful play.
Silk Road reached out to me and they said, we have this really talented artist that we want you to collaborate with. And I wasn't really familiar with the Muslim aspect of blues music. I was familiar with slavery. I was familiar with blues music. The opportunity came along to work together on this project. I got super excited because it's another aspect that I got to learn about. Hopefully audiences walk away with a new experience. They're able to see themselves on the stage. They'll be able to look and see the richness of their community and just how beautiful their narratives are. They'll also get the opportunity to really bridge the gap between the African American community and the Muslim community and see that they have a shared narrative. People getting that opportunity to see that there's a wealth of untold stories that they don't often get the chance to see.
All right, everyone, line up. Time for inspection.
You never know when you put out an original work what anybody's going to really think. You know, when you do something that's already been done, they look at it, at their style from a frame of reference. In this case, there is no frame of reference. The story that we're trying to even tell isn't a story that people are familiar with to begin with. So what I hope people walk away from is at least a little bit of curiosity to go look up some of these things. There are a lot of anecdotes. There's a lot of dramaturgy that is involved with something like this. And, you know, several of the anecdotes specifically for this play, for American Griot, are what is the history of the blues? What is the history of Islam in America? And how did it come here with the enslaved African people? And I just hope that it becomes a catalyst for others to go learn about these histories and piece together something that they may not have learned in school.
All right.
Wow, that was a blast from the past.
Yeah, I know, really. I was like, wow, that's a lot. But yeah, it's you know, it was an extraordinary experience, I think, for everybody involved. But one of the things that was most important for me was something you mentioned earlier, was that sense of omitted history. You know, and I feel like all of us who learned about American history didn't learn any of this, and particularly people like me who grew up in the Deep South. I'm from South Carolina. Wow. And I can tell you that what I was taught in the 60s and 70s as South Carolina state history, they mentioned this thing called the Civil War. That was this unfortunate thing that happened because the Yankees were horrible people, and then we moved on. I mean, that was kind of the frame of reference that we got growing up. So not only did we not even conceptually understand slavery at all, but certainly we never understood that there was a Muslim component to slavery, and a considerable one. What, 30 to 35% of the people that were enslaved. It was just something I remember watching the play. I mean, I was in on the process and I kind of understood what was going on, but sitting in that theater and experiencing that was a very visceral, uncomfortable thing, because you're being confronted with something that you suddenly go, I should have known that.
It's true. Yeah. And in some ways myself as well. I mean, I grew up in the public school system here in America, and I did not learn these things. I remember, I think the most poignant part of it was learning about the Native American history here. Beyond the Trail of Tears, I didn't know anything. I didn't know where we even lived. That Chicago was a Native American word. And on that note too, I want to take a second to acknowledge that we are on land that used to be guarded by the ancestors of this land. Everybody from the Potawatomi to the Ojibwe and several other tribes that were here. And I only learned that in the past few years. I can only imagine, right? How can one live such a long life and realize that the history that I've been taught had so many omissions in it? And I think it was music that really helped me realize that more than anything, because going to school, and I was taking music composition courses even at Moraine, I was learning a lot about dead white composers, Pretty much, yeah. And that, music started with Bach. Music began with Bach. And I knew there's something just inherently didn't feel right about that. And that's when I discovered Andalusia, and a lot of the music that I was playing, I didn't realize was actually from Spain, with some of the poems and the poetry, and that the Middle Eastern culture, Islamic culture, had a substantial amount to do with that. And then you think how a lot of that just ended in 1492, and we know what happens after that, but you don't erase an entire culture from the presence of just, this takeover, right, of the Reconquista. And so that learning that history and me going back to learn more about that history, I thought the process of that helped inform me about my own responsibilities to learn about, well, if I'm in America, I need to acknowledge that I am on land that was not my own. This was, and as a Palestinian, I'll tell you right now too that I feel that very viscerally. Let me just say.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because I think one of the books that just hit me like a ton of bricks was Killers of the Flower Moon. Have you read that one?
I have not. No,
it's
thank
by
you.
David Grant. It's about it's about a fairly atrocious genocide, which are all genocides are atrocious, but this one was more recent. It was in the 1920s in Oklahoma, and
Tulsa, in Tulsa.
Yeah,
the Tulsa massacre. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all based on oil, and it's an astonishing book. It's very, very disturbing, but it's a read that many people need to have because it puts it in a cultural context of saying this is not ancient history, and he makes the point that it's an ongoing thing, that it's still happening now. So
well, we're still grappling and dealing with the effects of it. It's almost like the civil rights movement that occurred, which occurred way too late, 100 years later. We're still grappling with this. It's not like this is ancient history. This is living history right now. And obviously with what happened last year with the movement for Black Lives and the killing of George Floyd and sparking the protests, it was only a matter of time that we as a country, as a collective of diverse people, are going to reckon with the history that, we're a part of. And the sooner we do that, I think the stronger we can all come out of it later. Because the truth is that there are going to be far greater battles ahead of us as a species, not as races, as people like to. I'm talking about as a species and existence, our existence alone. And we're going to need all of the smart minds, all the smartest people in the world. We're going to need all the people in the world to help us with that. So that's where my mind is. But yeah, you remind me of that. You're talking about, in Tulsa, they had Black Wall Street. They saw the success of entrepreneurs. The same thing occurred in Wilmington, North Carolina, when they saw that people of color and particularly African Americans were positioned in seats of power, and the KKK literally strolled through town and said, "You got till sundown to get out, or everybody's gone." And just it amazes me that even happened. But what amazes me more is how relatively recent that happened.
I mean, one of the things that for me is when you are somebody who does the work that I do, as a curator of artistic experiences, you realize it's at a certain point, and the first realization is, why didn't I realize this 25 years ago? But then once you get over beating yourself up for not getting it what you think of as soon enough, you feel like one of your responsibilities is, as a curator of art, is to dig into all of these cultures and this art and putting it out there for people. And I think the Mosaics program was perfect for this for me, because it was not about being confrontational. It was not about marching down the street to make your point. It was about very powerfully putting something out there for people, saying, look, you see yourself in this music, in this play, in this dance. So these people are you. They're not other. And so it's for me, it's using art as a way to tear down that concept of other, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, the power of medium especially I've learned through theater, through music, through the arts in general, through literature. It's amazing because you have the power in a safe environment, relatively speaking, you know, to convey something and give people thought-provoking questions that they need to ask themselves, and then they leave there. To move people's emotions through something like theater or music is probably the closest to divinity that we can get in some ways. I don't say that with hubris. I say that in a sense that you have the ability to not have to even physically touch somebody, but rather move their emotions in a way that they feel in touch with themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I often said when people ask me, you know, why do you do what you do, and you know, why are you passionate about it? I said, you know, there's something transcendent about coming into a space and being with a group of strangers, experiencing something together that then you realize afterwards you've all been changed together. You're not strangers anymore. You may not be best friends with the person who's sitting next to you, but you've now had a shared spiritual experience, and you know, and that's not being all woo-woo. It's a spiritual thing.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's funny because one of the arguments that I have had many times at conferences and in meetings is that there's this very strong subset of people in our industry who think if something is popular, that it's not art, that it has to be edgy or confrontational or global or whatever, but that something like going to see a tribute band is not art. And I'm like, I disagree. If somebody is having a bad day and they come into the theater and experience this and suddenly their mood is transformed into a good mood, we have now done our job, and that was art for them. It's just a different kind of art.
For sure. And, you know, to innovate, you have to imitate as well, you know, and not to mention it's honoring the tradition of a music or a song, even if it was from the 70s or 80s or whenever, you know. Absolutely. I agree with you.
Yeah. So, you know, so it kind of leads me to something. One of the clips you sent me, I was really fascinated by because it was the Chopin clip. And so I want to give me a little context of, I know where it is, but you can give us a little context of where you're performing and what this piece is, because it seems on one level, it's like, what's this? And then I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. So talk a little bit about this.
You know, again, I guess I'm a living testament to, if you stick to what you love long enough, things start to build. And, you know, just don't ever give up on doing what you want to do in life. And so I started to teach at the Old Town School of Folk Music for a little while, and for about 10 years.
A little while.
And, you know, it was my way to share my culture and instrument to a predominantly white audience. I'm going to say their demographics were that, you know, were such. But the Old Town School, while I was there, started to really make a lot of headway with different cultures and different arts and different folk arts and whatnot. Well, anyway, it gave me an opportunity to also be exposed to a larger audience of the world and a larger gamut of musicians as well. So I started to do just collaborations with various musicians, Indian musicians, Romanian musicians, just anything I can get my hands on. And one day, one of our colleagues there, Paulo Garcino, he was a brilliant Brazilian jazz guitarist, and he was doing this program that is headed by the most amazing, amazing singer, Gracina Oguszek. And she's of Polish origin. And every year through her organization, she would put together, I think her organization is called Sounds and Notation. And she would put together on Chopin's birthday this kind of different kind of celebration, right? It wasn't the typical, here's a piano and here's some Chopin. She would really bring artists from various backgrounds. So this particular one happened to be at Millennium Park. And I think it was one of the first or second that she celebrated Chopin's birthday with an array of artists from around the world. And ever since I was even young, I loved Chopin, and I would hear his music, and it was just so accessible, you know. It was what we would say in Arabic, the sahel mumtana, simple sophistication, you know. And so when she asked, would you be willing to play some of this classical music? And I had played Western classical music on both guitar and on the oud. I thought this is what a wonderful venue to give representation to the instrument, but also be a part of something that's so large and profound. And so she put this together, and the piece that we're actually performing here is called a mazurka, which is actually unique for Chopin because it's actually a folk form. But he turns it into this thing that's more or less classical. But it's a star-studded cast of people. Preceding me is Howard Levy, who is a world-renowned artist on the harmonica. The guy can play anything on the harmonica. We're not talking about blues. I'm talking about like classical, complex classical music. I had Jan Mexin, the brilliant cellist, with me. Matt Eulery, who heads up Eighth Blackbird and several other projects. And it was,
wow.
yeah, it was just an amazing star-studded cast. And she brought this Yannick, who was the accordion player, probably the greatest button accordion player I've ever seen in my life. And herself too is just unbelievable. I mean, I can go on and on about them, but what you're going to see basically is a segment of doing a piece from Chopin of a mazurka.
Okay, great. And it's queued up in the middle. So I think it's right before one of your highlights here. So
Okay.
well, hopefully I started it in a good place. We'll check it out.
That was another blast from the past.
Wow, I know. Like, wow, Ronnie, you look so young.
Yeah, they do. That was a lot less gray hair.
You're right. What, my God, what an extraordinary group of performers on that stage. And yeah, the accordion player. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You know, it's just such it's so nice to hear a fairly familiar piece. I've heard that mazurka before, but never like that. That's
For sure.
yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. It's you know, music is music, and I know a lot of people say, you know, music is a universal language. I mean, I agree. I'll say that sound is a universal expression. However, the understanding of music is more or less really more about, it's a cultural thing, because in some cultures, saying music, dance, and singing is the same word. So I'll say music is universal, but it has many dialects.
Yes, yes. Well, but you know, because I always say, you know, music is a universal language, and you're right. I think it's really sound is a universal language, but you know, the way that it can come together like that and never be the same twice is what I love about live performances. There's that visceral thing.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, as a performer, it's also terrifying because you're like, well, I got one shot to do this. There we go. So
Absolutely. But that's the part of it that's very exciting, because you're creating something new in the moment, you know, and it's something that's tangible yet also ephemeral at the same time.
Yep. Well, I think that's, you know, that's a good, I love that kind of concept and that thought to kind of close us out for the evening, because we are about out of time. But I've had such an amazingly good time chatting with you tonight. I mean, we've known each other for a while, but when I do these interviews, sometimes I have a chance to ask questions that I've just never been able to sit down and ask before.
Which is a wonderful thing. And I learned about you as well. So it's great. It's great.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody who has been watching tonight and commenting. Thank you all so much for being here and joining us week after week. So Ronnie, I want to say another big thank you. And just before we end tonight, do you have something coming up? Do you have like a new project or a gig or anything you're working on right now as we're moving closer to being sort of out of the pandemic?
Sure. You know, since the pandemic, I've been doing a lot more work in my recording studio, which I'm also producing music for myself and other Chicago artists right now. One large project that we have coming up, it's going to be part of the Night Out in the Parks with the Chicago Park District, and also sponsored through DCASE, the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. And that is one of my groups called Surabhi Ensemble, Surabhi. And we are collaborating with some members of another Chicago organization, music group called Sones de Mexico.
Oh, I love them.
And so we're working with Juan Diaz and Lorena Niguez from that group. And we put together this kind of, you know, continuing on our journey of bringing music together, because we do a lot of Indian, Middle Eastern, African, and Spanish music with Surabhi Ensemble. And having this other component to it kind of almost carries our journey, the ida y vuelta journey of music.
That's awesome. So make sure you send me information about that, and I can share it out on our social media for everybody so that they can keep an eye out for when that's going to happen this summer.
Sure thing. Will do. Absolutely.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much. I am going to take you out of the stream, but don't go away. Okay. We'll chat afterwards. But I want to say another big thank you for not just for tonight, but for all the amazing work that you did with us at Moraine during the Mosaic project. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Tommy. And thanks everybody for watching. I appreciate it.
All right. We're going to move off here. There we go. So everybody, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. This was our 32nd interview. Next week, which will be our 33rd interview, some of you will be sad to hear this, will be our final Meet the Artist interview. We've been doing this for almost a full year now, and it's time to wrap up this project. I've had an extraordinarily good time, but next week will be our final interview. And so I decided that we needed to do something different for next week's interview to close us down. Our very first interview in May of last year was with Mallory Lewis and Lamb Chop. So I'm bringing Mallory and Lamb Chop back next week, but we're flipping the microphone around. So Mallory and Lamb Chop will be interviewing me as our final artist on the Meet the Artist broadcast show. So next week you get to learn a little bit more about me as an artist and an arts presenter. So I hope that you tune in. All of these 33 After Next Week interviews are archived on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch any of them again. And I hope that you will. And I'll make sure that on our social media, we continue to put information out about that so that you can watch any of the interviews again that you would like to. So with that, I'm going to say good night for tonight, and I'll see you next week when we flip the microphone around and I get to sit in the hot seat and be interviewed. So until then, everybody take care, and I'll see you all next week.